Hey everybody, this is Jason at the Wine Merchant. Welcome to our new YouTube channel where it'll give me a little more room to do deep dives and really go in to the nuts and bolts of wine topics that we're passionate about. So I'm very excited, so welcome. We're going to talk about today the Judgment of Paris and how it impacted the greater wine world. This is all leading up to this weekend's 50th anniversary of the event and the tasting that we're going to be hosting here at the shop. So to just kind of give you a little bit of background here, we first got to talk about a British guy named Stephen Spurrier, who in the 1970s opened in Paris something called the Académie du Vin, and it was basically a wine school. And in today's world, that's not that remarkable, but in the 1970s, this was pretty one of a kind, and there weren't many out there. And the reason why he selected Paris for its home base was because at this point, the global view on wine was that terroir was solely in France, and the greatest wines in terms of age-worthy, cellar candidate type wines were French. The most gourmand wines produced in the world were all French. And Italy, which also made a lot of wine, was great stuff if you were looking for something to drink. Outside of that, everything else was generic table wine, and who cared? It was France or nothing. I think the French probably still feel that way, and I have parts of me that lean that way from time to time. We're a very French-centric store. It's just what we love, and there's a lot of other reasons for that passion about French wines, but to just stay on point, that's what brought Stephen Spurrier to Paris to start this wine academy and see what he could do in terms of educating the consumer about the great wines of France. At this time, he also was hearing a lot about the quality of wines in other areas of the world, specifically California. And his partner in the wine academy and wine stores, retail store as well, they came up with this idea. 1976 was approaching. This was a big birthday for the United States. It was our 200-year anniversary. And wouldn't it be fun to spend some time in California, where everybody keeps telling us they have all these great wines? We'll find some stuff we think is neat, and we'll bring it back, and we'll do a tasting. And at this point, there was nothing academic or collegiate or serious about this tasting. In no way, shape, or form did they set out to create this really deductive tasting that was going to sort of pit the great wines of France against this emerging market that was attempting to break into the global wine world, because California wasn't, and they weren't trying to present that at all. That was never their intent. This was always something like, wouldn't it be fun? And it evolved and it changed into something very different. If you've seen the movie Bottle Shock, you know how the rest of the story goes. It's 1975. Stephen Spurrier heads to California. He sets up his home base of operations in Napa Valley, and he hits the road. There were barely 60 wineries operating in the North Coast AVA, which is Sonoma, Napa, Lake County, some other areas. Their greater region is called the North Coast AVA. And so he just started traveling the North Coast AVA, tasting wines, trying to find some compelling examples. And this is where things changed for Stephen Spurrier, because what he began to taste and find were wines that were more than just kind of compelling. He really started to come to the conclusion that maybe terroir wasn't something exclusive to the French. that maybe there was more going on here than what he was initially thinking. And that helped him select a lot of great wines. And something else to kind of remember with this is none of the wineries in California were even notified about this tasting, because who cares? It never set out to be something more than just a fun, casual wine tasting with like some wine writers from France, some winemakers from France, some chefs, some just sort of like French gourmands who are very serious about wine, getting together and just for fun, tasting and scoring some wines. All the wines were graded on a 20-point scale, 1 being terrible, 20 being nectar of the gods. And then they turned it in, and the scores were tabulated. They did averages. They did not really tabulate this in any kind of a serious way. But what kind of came from this is now you have the 1976 Chateau Montelena Chardonnay sitting in the Smithsonian because of how iconic it is. You had all the wines served blind. We swear by blind tasting. It is the ultimate leveler in the wine field because people become so enamored with labels and regions and art and things like that, that you see the wine and you're like, that wine is good. And the placebo effect is a real thing. And if you see something and the artwork, previous history with the wine, these things start sparking in your brain and you taste the wine, your brain is going to smooth over a lot of what can be wrong with the wine. Blind, it's just you and the wine, the glass, nothing else, and it is just your assessment. Now, that does bring into question what was the caliber of assessment of these wines, a lot of other things. The end results are still the end results. These were not people who were specifically trained in blind tasting or anything like that. These, in a lot of ways, were just people who were passionate about food and wine and had a column in a Parisian newspaper. But I think they still carried a lot of knowledge and understanding, and at the time were essentially the equivalent of what a master sommelier would be today. Yes, they were much more rudimentary and basic in their assessment of wine in general, but for the time, they were still light years ahead of your average wine drinker and people like that. So I do think that it holds a lot of merit, and that's the results, is these were blind tasting scores. And I think that's really critical in understanding why this had such an impact on the greater wine world. Was it downplayed in France? Absolutely. Most were so embarrassed they didn't even publish the results. And the people who did publish the results slanted it in favor of the French wines and made fun of it. But I think it served as a wake-up call to French winemakers, but more importantly, and I think what's more kind of key here, is it served as a wake-up call to New World winemakers and to California winemakers. Because most grape growers in California at this point sold all of their fruit in bulk to the Gallo family, and they were paid by weight, not by quality. And that was the landscape of American wine. Is sure, you can grow grapefruit, you can crop at 4 to 6 tons per acre, really develop phenolics in your wine and make something great. But we're going to pay you by the tonnage, so you're just going to make less money, and it's going to go into a jug wine, and it will mean nothing. And this was the sort of impetus for many wineries to stop selling to Gallo, to start focusing on making good wine. And it was from here that we started to see what could really be special about California. Now, some fun things to note. Almost all of the Chardonnay, because that was the only white grape served in the tasting, all of the Chardonnay almost came from Sonoma. We are of the opinion the greatest Chardonnays emerging from California right now are typically coming out of the Sonoma coastline. Some pockets in Santa Barbara, some select spots in Napa as well too can make some compelling ones. But if we look for consistency where we're going, whoa, it's Sonoma Coast in California. A lot of the Chardonnay came from Sonoma for this tasting. The reds were all Bordeaux style blends or Cabernet Sauvignons with other grapes blended into them. And not all came from Napa. There was some fruit from Santa Cruz, up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There was some other really famous stuff. You know, the Chateau Montelena Chardonnay that won and emerged as the highest scoring wine in the whole tasting was actually made by Mike Gergich, who just passed away a few years ago and went on to start his own winery, Gergich Hills. So what I'm getting at here is, you know, these wines that sort of set up what would become Napa and Sonoma as we know it today, these winemakers and stuff, like the DNA was really sort of brought to light as to how great California wines could be at this event. And regardless of the impact, you know, hey, this very inexpensive, unheard of Ridge Cabernet Sauvignon based blend beat Mouton Rothschild, which is wildly more expensive. I don't think that that was the most salient point that came out of all of this. I think what really changed the wine world was it planted a seed in the brain of the grape growers in the New World, of the winemakers, that they could suss out the terroir in their vineyards. They could invest in better barrels, higher quality fermentations, better vineyard management, and make money. And up until this event, that was just fringe. That was just an experiment of a few. And it became the norm. And it grew into what we now know today in California, which is if you work hard on finding the right soils, the right vineyard sites, the right microclimates, if you manage the vineyard correctly, if you do the right kind of winemaking, you can make wines that rival these guys here. Mouton Rothschild, Grand Cru from La Flève, and both of these bottles are astronomically more expensive than high 90s% of what comes out of California. So that's kind of the deep dive on what this really, why we're so excited and why we feel like this is so important to celebrate this 50-year anniversary this weekend of the Judgement of Paris. You know, Stephen Spurrier then went on to create arguably one of the greatest wine magazines on the planet, Decanter Magazine. You know, Decanter employs more masters of wine than any other publication on the planet. They are the gold standard in wine reviews, in our opinion, because everything is done blind. It's not just done blind, but it's blind by masters of wine, which is one of the most difficult diplomas to obtain in the wine world. You know, the wineries involved on both sides have gone on to, you know, sort of obtain these icon statuses within the wine world. So this Saturday, hop in. We're going to feature 8 of the wineries. It's not all of them. We're going to feature 8 of the wineries that participated in the original 1976 tasting. We're not going to taste the exact wines that these wineries produce in the blind tasting because a lot of these are now insanely expensive. but they will be wines from these wineries, from their properties. So I think we will be able to assess them side by side with each other. And we're going to serve it blind, and you're going to score them up. So I think it's going to be super fun. I think it's going to be kind of a one of a kind. We haven't done one of these blind tastings in a long time, so I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you can join us. I hope you enjoy these deep dives. These are going to be one of many, and we're just going to keep lobbing them out there. So we'll see you soon, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.